Hello, today I'm looking at the different cars that are in Zenless Zone Zero, specifically the cars that are on 6th Street, which is the main hub in the early game, in the early story. It's where your store is, and there are a few different cars here that I thought were quite interesting. I didn't realise at first, but all the cars on here have very clear design inspirations from real-world cars, even though it is a futuristic setting. The first one that really struck my mind on this was this one that you can see out the back of your store. This sort of sporty car here. Because you can't really see through the chain link fence, I'll also put up a picture from the square on the road where you can see it a little bit better. And the car looks like quite a lot of various cars. Is it a specific car? Well, I think it is basically a specific car. If we look at the badge, we can see that this is 3 red dots in a triangle formation, one on the top, one bottom left, one bottom right, which is very similar to the Mitsubishi logo. And so, if we look at late 90s Japanese sports cars, this is an incredibly striking resemblance to the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution. However, it's not, as you can see, a perfect thing, and that's kind of two things. One is that yes, it has inspiration from other cars, so for example, the roof scoop is very similar to what's on a lot of Subarus, like Subaru Impreza, and these sort of side air intakes, also you can see that on this image of a Nissan Skyline GTR, has the same or similar side front in front of the front wheel air intakes. However, none of them are also quite correct, so we can see clearly that these are still inspirations from the real cars, but still a more fantastical version of them. So what we have here is sort of a fantasy mix-up that is mostly taken from the Lancer Evolution, but with a few things from other cars, with the Lancer Evolution as the base, and then sort of made a bit more unrealistic and copyright-free, presumably. You can especially see how on this particular image, not only is the colour the same of course, but even the rear spoiler looks very similar. Of course, the most obvious car that everyone sees is the random play business car. And this is very clearly what's known as a K car, which is a certain classification of Japanese small car. Due to certain government regulations, it was often very good to get cars that were beneath certain dimensions, and so you get a lot of these cars that are specifically made to be get as much as you can within that area, which is why you end up with these odd proportions like this. Now this one, because it is heavily modified, that makes it a little bit harder to get an exact look at what it could potentially be. This does have the same 3 dots on the front, so you would think that might mean that it's also Mitsubishi. However, looking up a couple of Mitsubishi K cars like the Mini C and the EK, it doesn't quite, I mean, it looks closer to the EK than the Mini C, but it doesn't quite fit any of them. What I would say is that overall this looks a lot more like the Suzuki Wagon R, which was a very popular K car. And looking up, they aren't, like, the headlights look very different to any of them. But one thing that I found really kind of gives away that this is meant to be the Wagon R is actually a screenshot from another video game, Gran Turismo 2, a racing game on the PS1, where it has the Wagon R. And this screenshot of the Wagon R, you can see very clearly how the windows on that car line up the same style. The first window has that curved bit at the top and a straight edge and bottom. And then the middle is very square with a little bit of rounding, and then it has the small, very separate thing at the end. So what I would say here is that this is a very heavily modified, and again still fantasy version, but heavily modified version of the Wagon R. So for example, you can see the back door is on backwards, all the lights and the trimmings and all this sort of stuff, all these extra little bits. So, but overall I would say this is very much like a Suzuki Wagon R. So those are the cars that are in the back area. So if we go over to the main bit of 6th Street, there are two other cars that are always on the streets here. The first one is the very obvious one, which is this little pickup truck here. This is another Japanese mini vehicle, a K truck, if you will. And this one is not immediately, I mean, of course, trucks like this, most people probably don't know the specifics between them. However, looking it up, I was able to actually find what I think this is mostly based on, and this one is less clear than the others, I would say, because of the front, but the thing that gives this one away, I would say, is actually on the side doors, which is another Suzuki, the Suzuki Carry. The Suzuki Carry has been around for a long time. It has lots of different looks. A lot of them have these round headlights and black grille, but the thing that really gives away is that there are certain generations of them, sort of in the middle, that have this very specific, by the door, curve on the bottom half going to straight up, and you can see that change on the door. That's something that is very specific to that. Now this, you can see the back area is taller on the edge bit, or should we say not so much taller, but it goes lower down, the sides go lower than on the Suzuki Carry. I think that's most likely simply to be different, to change it up a little bit rather than being inspired by a specific vehicle, because the front cabin is so close to these specific things. And again, it's a solid rectangle black area, which only the versions of the Suzuki Carry that I could see that had a solid rectangle front rather than a dip down in the black area had different headlights, so it seems to be a sort of a mismatch of different versions of and different generations of the Suzuki Carry. Now that is what I believe is the car by this area. And then there's one more. You may have seen this, you may have not. If you saw it, you probably knew exactly what it was. Yes, it's this one here. And of course, my first reaction is, of course, aha, that's a Honda S2000. No, it's not. That is not a Honda S2000, and I should have realised what it was. But when I saw the headlights there, I realised that's definitely not a Honda S2000. That is definitely a Mazda MX-5, and specifically, I believe that this is the Mazda MX-5 NA version, which is like the first generation Mazda MX-5, and this combines two different. Most MX-5s are generally soft tops, but this one they did do hard top versions of the NA. And the later ones they did hard top versions as well, but specifically the NA had. You could get NAs with hard tops, and you could get NAs with the front headlights. I don't know if for certain they did both the hard top and front headlights in the same vehicle, but because both versions exist and this is a heavily modified car, it's very easy to understand that someone could easily take the hard top from one car and put it onto a convertible car that has the pop-up front headlights. Also, we do see that on this one, the number plate, the license plate says GSK, which, while that doesn't itself sound like MX-5, it's 3 characters long, so that's sort of like the same thing, I guess, sort of. Although it does have, again, the area between the headlights is somewhat different to the MX-5, and then it has like this wide body kit and very weird wheels, which, yes, the modified Wagon R version car thing, the back wheels were also slightly tilted, but the front wheels weren't, but on this one all the wheels are tilted inwards. I don't think that gives a real-life logistical advantage. But yes, that is all the cars that are on 6th Street. There are some other cars on the square, but these are all the ones that you'll see parked around all the time here. And I thought it was very interesting personally how all the cars are, you know, inspired by real ones, and I think that actually helps the game a lot, because there are a few cars in this game that look like they are not inspired by real ones, and I don't think they look very good. So I think, and specifically, not only are all they inspired by real cars, but they are inspired by a specific sort of era, sort of a late 90s, early 2000s. In the case of this truck, slightly older, but I mean, it looks like it's supposed to be older, but most of the cars are inspired by this sort of late 90s. No, I'm not going to do the bikes, I don't know anything about bikes. But I personally enjoy it. I personally believe that is some of the best car design that there's ever been, these sort of late 90s sports cars. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and until whenever, toodles.